Hello everyone, welcome to Art Tips, series of videos where I share various drawing secrets and techniques with you. Today's episode will be a short one. I'll be showing you what not to do. I want to discuss an interesting and quite popular technique often seen on YouTube, mainly used for portraits. It can produce decent results. Here's my attempt. But if you put in some extra effort and dedicate more time to it, you can do such drawings. Pretty good, isn't it? However, it's not as straightforward as it seems, so let's dive in. But first, let me clarify the technique we'll be discussing in this video. It doesn't have a specific name, and I personally call it piece-by-piece drawing. To give you a better idea, here are a couple of images in a similar style that you've probably come across. Honestly, I've experimented with this technique myself, especially in my earlier videos when I did portraits. You might have noticed that I used to draw in a more fragmented manner. For this video, I've recorded the process of creating a portrait using the piece-by-piece technique. You'll see the drawing process, and I'll provide explanations, comments, and try to uncover the essence of this technique, its pros, cons, and, most importantly, why I believe it's not ideal for hobbyists, especially beginners. Now, let's take a look at my working sheet. Just to clarify, it's a 3-format paper with a watermark, and I'll primarily be using Faber-Castell 2B pencils with a touch of 5B. The sheet already has a meticulously detailed and precise outline, which is crucial for this technique since it essentially involves coloring. How you create this outline doesn't matter. You can draw it freehand, use a grid, or trace it. What's most important is precision and accuracy. It would also be helpful to have a high-quality photo print to better understand the tones. I'll explain why this is important a bit later, and you'll probably grasp it as you see the process. I began my drawing focusing on the eyes. They are the most expressive and highly contrasting part of the face. Almost always, this is where people start shading the initial sketch. In this technique, there aren't strict rules about where to begin exactly. It depends on individual habits. Some work from left to right, top to bottom, to prevent smudging the graphite or charcoal with their hand. However, I find it a bit challenging. I address smudging by placing a piece of paper under my hand. At the moment, I'm working on the second eye for the portrait, which you can see. By the way, I don't usually employ this approach in other techniques. So, what's the core of this method? As mentioned, it involves drawing piece by piece and focusing on completing each section almost entirely before moving on. You can revisit sections later, but any adjustments should be minor, mainly to better blend them with the rest. In my work, you'll notice me frequently returning to areas because I'm more accustomed to working academically. But there are artists who, like printers, render each section with great precision, something I can't do, whether fortunately or unfortunately. In this particular piece, I've intentionally reduced the speed slightly so you can better understand the character of my work, though the details aren't the primary focus here. Everyone can approach this in their own way. I start with very sharp pencils, mainly using hatching and a bit of shading. The strokes are short, layered, and I smudge them every time a section is completed. This is essential for achieving a smooth and even tone, which is what provides realism. Many amateur artists struggle with this, and this technique, which I've just explained, is commonly used for realistic drawing, or more accurately, tracing. I'll explain a few more nuances shortly, and then discuss the pros and cons. Personally, for me, and many who work traditionally, mastering the creation of a high-contrast tone in a specific area right away can be challenging. This is where a printout can be helpful when transferring the image from one sheet of paper to another. It makes it easier to understand what's needed. For those who use classical methods and want to give this a try, here's a tip. I recommend starting with some contrasting sections and then connecting them with intermediate, lighter areas. If you find yourself enjoying this style of drawing, you can move on to more challenging pieces later. That's about it. I don't see the need to dive too deeply into the specifics of what I do in each area, as that would turn this into a tutorial. Now, let's talk about the downsides of this method. The most significant drawback is that this technique is almost exclusively suitable for tracing and not particularly well at that. It doesn't teach you to think in terms of volumes, which is essential, especially when drawing from imagination or a sketch. Here, we're essentially copying tonal patches in specific areas. Even if you become proficient at copying like this, creating something original can be quite challenging. That's why, in my opinion, it's best for beginners to avoid starting with this technique. Another significant drawback of this method is the challenge it poses for making corrections. Since you won't see the complete picture of your drawing until the very end, you won't fully grasp how everything will look. If an error occurs, especially in the initial stages, such as inaccurate and distorted proportions in the preliminary sketch, or a tone that's too dark, it's almost impossible to rectify. This technique of piece-by-piece drawing has a steep learning curve, especially when it comes to developing your eye for detail. Here, we heavily rely on the accuracy of the initial outline, and not many can create a genuinely accurate one. Even if you manage to do that, it won't help much without a keen eye for detail. Naturally, these skills develop with experience, but beginners often lack them. This is another reason why it's not advisable to experiment with this technique during the early stages of self-study. The last drawback I see is the mosaic-like quality. Sometimes, the artwork is copied meticulously, proportional in each section, and looks great piece by piece. However, when viewed as a whole, it doesn't quite come together. This is encouraged by the piece-by-piece drawing approach because you tend to focus on the details. But what are the advantages of this method? The most significant advantage is the level of detail. If meticulous work is your priority, it's motivating to immediately see a well-detailed final result, even if it's a small section. Of course, this is best for advanced artists with a great eye and skills. In such cases, this method enables you to create images that are almost like photographs. Unlike traditional art, where you draw the entire picture at once, achieving intricate detail and lifelike quality can be more challenging, based on my experience. Nevertheless, I won't discourage you from using this technique. It's a matter of personal preference. Some artists aim for photorealism, while others prefer a more artistic touch. Personally, I have a preference for realistic drawing and occasionally use this method for specific results. In the video, I'm finishing the face and hands, concluding the piece-by-piece approach. I'll handle the hair and clothing more cohesively to allow for creative freedom and imagination. I hope my video podcast has been informative. Please share your thoughts. I've expressed my opinion, and I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. See you in future videos. Goodbye.